you're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
All right, welcome back to Horror Queers Hangout. Obviously, Trace is not here with us, and that's because we are talking about Sundance 2022, and he was not there. So instead, I have invited my friends, Terry Mesnard of Gaily Dreadful. Hi, Terry.
Hello.
As well as Jessica Scott, who is a writer at Daily Grindhouse, as well as an editor at Film Cred. Hi, Jessica.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm excited to have this conversation because
Me too.
I feel like we saw a bunch of really interesting / good films at Sundance this year, and I haven't really had a chance to break some of them down. So we have selected a couple of films that all three of us have seen so we can have a good conversation about it. And I'm going to kick it over to Jessica to suggest one that we'll start off with.
I am interested to hear what you both think about Speak No Evil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for I guess to give like a little synopsis, it's about a Danish family that visits a Dutch family after they meet on a holiday in Italy. And what was supposed to be an idyllic weekend slowly starts to unravel as the Danes try to stay polite in the face of unpleasantness. And that's from IMDb.
Mm-hmm. And we should probably note that, folks, we're not going to do spoilers, so we'll keep it sort of vague and give you our impressions and maybe a couple of little details to get you excited about the films. But we recognize that these are festival films that are not publicly available yet. So listen in, have fun, look forward to some of these movies. But yeah, so Speak No Evil, it's been picked up by Shudder, and I think it's coming out later on this year. So Terry, what did you think of this one?
It was an interesting watch because I did think it sort of drags a little bit, particularly in the middle section. I think that there's a couple moments that where it feels very, I guess, writerly in a way where it's like, if this was real, I don't think people would be staying, like even as much as the politeness aspect of it is being examined, because this is all a movie about, that sort of like trying to be polite in the face of things that are kind of ticking your buttons or pushing you. It's sort of like taking the idea of comedy of errors, I would guess, or the comedy of manners, where people are kind of trying to be like the upper crust and not like, insult the other family, but yet the other family is doing everything that they can to like needle them, from continually making meat dishes when the wife has said multiple times that she's vegetarian, to sort of like putting their daughter into uncomfortable positions and situations. So it's just like all of these kinds of things that I feel like if this was a real situation and you really had no ties to this family, at some point you'd probably leave. But yeah, I think that the ending in particular helps bring it all together. And I think without that very brutal ending, that really made me uncomfortable, I don't know if the movie would completely work, but I'm curious what you guys thought.
Yeah, Jessica, what did you think?
Yeah, Terry and I are definitely on the same page. I would have liked to have seen more dynamics in the movie, because it felt like it kind of started at 11, and not in terms of what they're going through, but we've got a lot of scenes where you can't hear the dialogue. They're having these, jaunty little adventures on their holiday, and on their time together. But the score comes in overbearing, letting you know everything is not right here. And there's such a discrepancy between what we're seeing and what we're hearing that you're already on alert at the highest level, and there's nowhere to go from there. So it's not a slow burn because they've already turned the heat up all the way, if that makes sense. So it kind of felt like, horror fans are going to be like, I know what's coming, or I kind of know what's coming right away, and that was frustrating for me.
Yeah, I felt kind of the same way. I came to this late, so I saw this in the second screening round. So a bunch of people had already posted reactions either on Twitter, or I had started to see some reviews come up. And I knew that the anticipation was all about the ending and how mean the ending was, how severe it was. And I think as fans of horror and even maybe exploitation films, that gets us going, right? Like, oh, how mean is it? How cruel is it? but part of this is that it feels like the film is so much about the payoff at the end, which is really admittedly good, but you've also got to get there. And I think what you're both talking about is that sometimes it just feels like we're waiting for the moment where we get to pay it all off. And not, to be fair to the film, there are some legitimately good, uncomfortable reactions. Like, if you are one of those people who is conflict averse, this is going to be a really, I don't want to say triggering movie, but yeah, like it really gets you feeling anxious. I had my shoulders hunched a lot of the film, but I think I agree with both of you that I wish it had a sort of like leveled up to it. Just play it kind of cautious at the beginning and then move into it, because this couple that is hosting them is pretty full on from very, like, right from the beginning, to the point where you just think, okay, well, I probably would leave after the first day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of key in on the score though, because I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the things that I actually kind of liked about it was that the score, it vanishes in a lot of places of high tension. And so there's this moment where in the beginning it's very bombastic and loud, and I'm like, okay, this might be a little too much, but it did do its job of making me uncomfortable even when it was very idyllic. But then when moments that were actually horrific kind of happened, the music in some cases just sort of fell out or moved to the background. And I thought that was an interesting kind of dynamic that they did with the score. And it was one thing that I actually kind of dug, even though I was like from the very beginning going, okay, we're going bombastic, so we're uncomfortable the entire way. Like, it was very on the nose, but it also kind of worked for me.
Yeah, I can get that, because I hate it when a movie steps on its own toes, when it's presenting something horrible and then the music comes in like, do you see how horrible it is? So I agree with you on that. That was really smart to pull back in those moments where we're actually seeing something horrific.
Yeah, it also reminded me of Funny Games in a way.
Very much.
Yeah, I was getting Heineke vibes for sure. Which is maybe like a good cue to people. Hey, if you like those kinds of movies, this is probably going to be a good fit for you. I mean, we should also note this is a short movie. It's not like we're watching this for 2 hours or something. It's actually relatively brief, but yeah, I think just in certain points you think, I wish they had maybe approached this a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think some of it is a little like the score, a little on the nose, because there's this one moment when the family, early on in the film, the family gets back from their trip to Italy, and they got this postcard from their new friends that they met on the trip, inviting them to their place, and they're having dinner with their friends, and the friends are like, it would be impolite to decline. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? And I was like, okay, really? Really? That's what we're doing here.
Yeah, I've often wondered, do you think that because we watch so much horror, we are just already primed for this kind of thing? And maybe this would go down a little bit easier for quote unquote regular audiences?
I'm glad you brought that up, because in the introduction, the director mentioned that he is not a horror fan, not big on horror films. And I do not mean this as an insult, but I can see that. This is kind of a horror film for normies. This is a horror film for non-horror fans, from my opinion.
Which is funny, right? Because that ending goes so hard. I actually think this would be a huge turnoff. I'm kind of glad that it's been picked up by Shudder, because I think that's a good home for it, because it will appeal to horror fans. But also, I cannot imagine this film doing well in a theatrical exhibition with regular folks, because it would be a cinema score.
Absolutely, yeah. I think they would be with it up until a couple of points near the end, and absolutely the ending, people would be walking out furious, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we can wrap it up there, unless there's any other thoughts on Speak No Evil.
I'm good.
Okay. So Terry, what's another film you want to talk about?
Okay, so I really want to talk about it's genre adjacent, I would say, but Emily the Criminal.
Okay.
Which it stars Aubrey Plaza, and it's also produced by her production company. And it's about down on her luck and saddled with debt, Emily gets involved in a credit card scam that pulls her into the criminal underworld of Los Angeles, ultimately leading to deadly consequences. But I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this, because for me it really worked. I thought it was very lean. I thought it was very mean. I thought Aubrey Plaza, who I don't think gets a lot of credit for her acting ability because she's often seen as the sort of
She's the
sarcastic
funny
Parks and
girl.
right. She's the Parks and Rec character, and she does that so well. But like when she chooses roles that allow her to kind of branch out, I think she does incredibly well. And this, I thought her performance in this is what for me made the movie. But I'm curious to hear what you guys kind of thought.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Jessica.
Okay, I loved this one too. I am a big Aubrey Plaza fan,
Mhm.
and especially
Mhm.
her digging into more dramatic or stranger roles than what
Yes.
she's known for. So I hate to use the word edge, but she brings an edge to the character that I really
Yeah.
love. And also, I'm a huge Theo Rossi fan, and their
Yeah.
chemistry together was fantastic. That was, lightning in a bottle, which really helped the movie work even more. But yeah, I got like Michael Mann vibes throughout, like that
Hmm.
kind of like just like the blue wash, and just as you said, it's really lean, it's
Mhm.
really brisk, it moves well, and I got some really strong Michael Mann vibes, and I mean that as the highest compliment. But yeah, I am a huge fan of her. Obviously, I think there are a lot of people who can identify with her. I'm saddled with student debt, I can't get a job. That I think you'd be hard pressed to find many people that doesn't speak to, and I loved that.
Yeah, I really appreciated the fact that I feel like we have a lot of conversations about morality and unlikable characters at the moment. And maybe that's just us in our little Twitter kind of silo. But I appreciated the fact that she's not always an easy character to like. She goes into some of these job interviews and she's very opinionated and she's very frank. She's unafraid to speak her mind. And I think, well, some people will find that a bit off putting. I really appreciated it because she felt like a real human being, right? She's tired
Mhm.
of going into these minimum wage jobs that demand unreasonable expectations of you, but can't pay you a living wage, which is honestly the economic reality of a lot of people these days. And she just tells these people off because, yeah, she has a criminal record and that's going to come up, but she gets bait and switched in this one job interview. And then she gets really justifiably mad at this dude. And he's like, well, that was a test. How can I trust you if you're not going to be forthcoming? And you're just like, you can so easily understand why she ends up slowly falling into this life of crime. And even when you're like, girl, no, get out of there, this is not safe, it's not good for you, or like you made a bunch of money, it's like a casino, get out now. Well, you still
Mhm.
can, but she can't, right? Because she gets addicted to this lifestyle and the adrenaline. And I think the film does a really good job of bringing us along in a reasonable sort of a way that makes sense to audiences, like why she doesn't just stop and get back to a regular life.
Absolutely. And she almost has an out. And I think she sees it as an out because she kind of puts her life of crime on pause, thinking, okay,
Mhm.
maybe this legit job will work out. And then, of course, another, I don't know how much I should say about it because it occurs quite late in the movie, but it's something that I think a lot of us have experienced where, again, it's a bait and switch, but to an even larger degree.
Mhm.
And then she finally succumbs. It doesn't feel like she ever really has a choice. The economy is all about not having a choice and being forced down this path that does not work for you.
Yeah, well, two of the things that I should say, I guess, that the interviews were two of the things that I really appreciated about this movie, because it's sort of, we see these characters that are rattled with, debt, that aren't able to get a job, that are trying very hard to do the right
Mhm.
thing, but
Yep.
aren't able to because of the expectations of capitalism, I would say.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
there's this moment in particular in the second interview where she's given this opportunity, they're doing this interview and it sounds all great, and she's like, well, yeah, you'd be an intern. She's like, okay, well, I get paid, well, you'd be an intern. And it's the moment that she's able to just like see that, like, this is not going to get me anything. I cannot do this as much as I would love to, because
Mhm.
how am I going to, if I'm going to work at full-time internship and not get paid, how am I going to find another job to actually, sustain my life?
Yeah.
And so then when she gets angry at this, the person says that she's entitled. And I just like, ooh, and then it
I was
just set
so
off.
mad. I was so
Yes.
mad.
So mad, yes. And it was more of like an aggravating, intense situation than anything else that happened in the movie for me, because it's like this, ooh, it feels so real. And then she launches into her tirade, and I'm like, this is what I think most people would want to do in that situation. But
Yeah.
you know, that sort of like interior monologue says, can't do this, got to be polite, got to be polite. Speaking of politeness, and
Yeah.
she just like says, screw that, and just launches into this tirade. And I just, it's like a good for
Yeah.
you know,
We're all there
moment.
with her. So one of the other things I think the film does really well is the violence feels really real. So there's a couple of moments, like we're talking about a credit card scam. So Emily is put in danger of being found out. And because she already has a criminal record, obviously we know that if she is ever apprehended, it's going to be pretty severe for her. But it starts off small, right? Where she and a bunch of other people are told to go in and use fake credit cards to buy large screen TVs. And then it escalates from there to getting a car. And she's told, you've got until this period of time to get out of there, at which point they will know that you are faking it or that the card you're using is a scam, in which case you'll be compromised. And I found the tension really, really effective. Like I was so afraid for Emily. And I think the way that it's shot, it's a lot of handheld kind of quick edits. It feels like an action film, but with realistic stakes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where I was getting the Michael Mann vibes, was the tension, and it felt more like an action film than it really is. Because I'm with you, I was so nervous, because you can see yourself being in this situation. You show up for a job, you don't know what it is, you just know you're going to make $200 in 2 hours or however long it was. It sounds great.
Yeah.
A lot of us would probably show up to that
Yeah.
warehouse or whatever it was,
Just the one time. I'll just do it for the quick money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I've got a bill that just came up. I just one more time, and we can see ourselves in that situation. We can see ourselves in that store, kind of looking around, trying not to be noticed. I it talk about a slow burn. To me, this is a slow burn because she gets deeper and deeper into it, and you're with her the whole way, because I could see myself showing up for that job. And then once you're that far, why not go a little farther? Once you're that far, why not go even further? So I'm with you 100% on the action movie feel, but having more intimate stakes, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about a slow burn that maybe doesn't always satisfy or is maybe going to have a rockier reception. I'm talking about Master, which is a new film that's going to be coming to Amazon in a little bit. It stars Regina Hall as the first Black head of a, what do we say? This is probably a New England kind of arts and humanities college. And there's also a student who is moving into the dorms. So she's a freshman Black student, and she is told that she is housed in a dormitory that is famous for a woman who took her own life back a couple hundred years ago, was maybe a witch and that sort of thing. And this film is very heavily interested in exploring systemic racism and some folklore. And I felt like there was a very mixed reception for this film, and I'm curious to hear what you folks think. So, Jessica, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I maybe enjoyed is the wrong way to put it. I thought it was good. I did not enjoy, because talk about painful to watch, because from this moment that Jasmine steps foot on campus, the freshman, she there's just this onslaught of racism because she's one of 8 Black students at this whole school, and Gail, Regina Hall's character, faces the same thing from her colleagues on the faculty. But I thought the horror elements were really well done. There are some scenes and some images from the movie that have really stuck with me and kind of wake me up at night, because it's kind of, there's a supernatural element, there's the witch element, but there's also just the specter of like the history of what has happened to Black students at this racist university. And I thought it mixed together well. I know that it has had, as you say, a mixed reception, but I thought it was great. I thought the horror elements worked well. I thought some of the camera work was just stunning. I was drawn in immediately and enjoyed the movie quite a bit. But I'm curious to see what y'all say.
So Terry, I think you're one of the people who it didn't work quite as well for.
Yeah, that's correct. I the things that you're talking about, Jessica, I for sure agree with. I loved the kind of cinematography behind it. I love that it sort of evoked, I would say, Suspiria vibes, or that kind of genre, that kind of sub genre that Suspiria is like probably one of the keynote foundational texts for. But so I love the look of it. I love the acting in it. Regina Hall. I mean, anytime she shows up, I have to sign up for it every time she shows up because I love her as an actress. I think she is great comedic timing. I think she's a great dramatic actress. I love her. And so the moment that I saw that she was going to be in this movie, I was like, instant, got to get this movie. I don't even know. I don't want to know anything about it. She's great. Yeah. She's really good in it. Zoe Renee, who plays Jasmine, the student, is fantastic.
Also really good. Yeah.
Yes. Ella Hunt, who plays a small character, was like a nice little surprise because she was and she's Anna from Anna and the Apocalypse. I was like, oh, you're showing up in here. That's kind of cool. So I love the acting. I love the cinematography. My biggest problem with this movie, for me, was the script, and not necessarily what it was trying to do, but the way it was formatted and structured. Some scenes would just sort of abruptly end and move to the next character, and so I didn't feel like there was ever any growth, like intention growing, because it was like it would focus on Gale and then it would just shoot to Jasmine for a scene and it would shoot back to Gale and then it would shoot to the other teacher, Liv, and it just I'd never felt that there was like a growing sense of tension for each story. Maybe overall there was, but I didn't really feel like I got to know these characters very well. And I know that it's sort of a faux pas to be like, well, I would have liked to have seen, but honestly, I think that if this was structured more as like an anthology aspect, where we got to spend more consistent amount of time with the characters as opposed to a scene and then in a scene and then in a scene with this sort of almost slapdash approach to it, I think that it probably would have really coalesced the story for me in a lot more cohesive way. So that was my biggest issue with this. I liked a lot. I've seen some people not really happy with the horror stuff, but the horror stuff worked for me. There's a couple non sequiturs that I thought was a little weird and out there that are just sort of put in there, and I'm like, okay, what are we doing? I feel like we're throwing everything in here. But again, the acting, the cinematography, I liked what it was ultimately saying at the very end. I love sort of the final moments of this movie, but there's just I don't know, the structure of the script just did not do anything for me.
Yeah, I think I'm coming in somewhere in between the two of you because I can absolutely understand what you're saying, Terry. There's a bunch of things that kind of feel like they don't entirely pay off. And I don't know if it was a deliberate decision or if it was just the way that the narratives don't quite coalesce or even speak to each other. And I appreciate your anthology comment because I do wonder if that might have provided a bit of a better guiding structure. I think when people do see this in March on Amazon, they're going to expect a better payoff or something to kind of bring the whole film together. And the film doesn't really seem to be as interested in doing that. With that said, though, I think in part that may have been a little bit deliberate because we're left feeling very unsettled. Like there isn't a nice resolution to make us feel better about the fucking systemic racism that has plagued this campus and these two women, well, really the three women, because Liv, the other teacher, is a relatively big character. Like once I kind of figured out that the film wasn't going to pay off everything it was doing, I found that it went down a lot easier because I was then just sort of focusing on the acting, the cinematography. I do think what scares we get are effectively rendered to the point where I'm interested in seeing what a next feature will look like from this filmmaker. And sorry, I should be better and actually reference who I'm talking about. So this is by Maria Maria Diallo, and I really really like the look of this film and the way that it's shot. So part of me is kind of like, oh, I hope she makes like just a more straightforward horror, which sounds terrible because I think that this is ultimately the film that she wanted to make, and it's just that it's not exactly meeting my expectations as a genre fan. But I do worry that there are going to be people who just write it off as a result because it's not doing the thing that they want it to do.
Yeah.
I can see that. I will say I do enjoy that we've got such a broad range of takes on it, because I, you know, like I have seen divisive reactions, and um, I think I watched the premiere of this one and was on Twitter immediately like, oh, horror Twitter, you need to see this movie, because I was so impressed with some of the scares. But a lot of stylistically, this is very much my lane. You know, the Suspiria aspect. There are elements of The Shining. There are some other elements that they come into play. It's very much my lane, and I loved it. And I loved the imagery and the look of the film. I completely understand what you're saying about things feeling kind of disjointed, but I'm with Joe. I feel like that was the intention, and that's why it worked for me. I can see why it would take you out of the movie maybe, or be dissatisfying, but for me everything felt very intentional, and I was right there with Diallo in her intention, if that makes sense. So I really appreciated it.
Mm-hmm. I will say, I think if folks have seen something like Dear White People, this is going to be a kind of good genre adjacent fix for you because it feels like it's tackling a lot of the same issues. Terry, when you were mentioning more of an anthology style, I was actually thinking, oh yeah, because that show actually focuses on a single character each episode, and other characters intersect and come into play, but it's generally focused on a single individual so it can kind of tell their story a little bit. But yeah, I guess I also just want to echo the shout out for Regina Hall because I'm not used to seeing her in dramatic roles. So I was curious to see how she was going to fare. And, you know, there's a couple of times where the iconic voice comes in and I got a little bit of Brenda from Scary Movie, but I think it's just, oh, that's her voice. And if she has to yell or project or something like that, you're going to get a little taste of it. But I just thought she was so captivating and like
she commands the screen.
that's just it, right? Because she's in an uncomfortable position a lot of the time. Like there's a moment where she's sitting on the review committee for a friend of hers, the Liv character, who's going up for tenure, and she's trying to negotiate this traditional ivory tower path that it's like publish or perish, and Liv has not done enough publications, but also she's the only Black woman who is coming up for tenure, and Regina Hall is the only Black chair of this institution. And you're just like, you know, I feel like it's so on the pulse of conversations that we're having right now about like what is equitable and what is too woke, and it's a lot of nonsense stuff that we're having to deal with because we need to appreciate how much people have suffered and that it's not giving them a handout. It marginalized communities, people of color, and so on. Like this film is really adept at negotiating and helping people to understand like all of your beliefs about like, oh, well, now suddenly white people are being disenfranchised because they don't get stuff. You're just like, no, that's actually garbage and nonsense. Like this movie does a really good job of saying, look at the shit hand that a lot of Black people have been handed, and it's not fucking fair.
And how stacked it is against them. I mean, that's one of the things in this movie, and that was one of the moments towards the end that I really, again, I don't want to get into spoilers, but that really kind of worked for me is a specific reveal or maybe reveal, and how that kind of complicates things. It's a mess, but when you take a look at what is happening out there, it is also a mess. And so I can definitely see that there is that, you know, that a lot of that was probably absolutely intentional. And but it really does kind of show the sort of like, you get in here and then you got nothing. You have no one to hold on to. You have nothing to launch onto. You're just sort of hopefully going to make it out in one piece. And that I think I do think Master does an exceptional job of putting you in each of those characters' shoes for that. Absolutely.
And the difficulty of, you know, you can't, Gail can't help Jasmine like she would like to and try to follow the path she set out for herself, navigating this white institution at the same time. So it sets these Black women up for failure, and it pits them
Yes.
against each
Pits them
other
against
by
each other.
design. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's really hard to watch in that way. Like I actually feel like this is a better racial commentary than it is a horror film. But then when the horror parts do pop up, they're so effective that it makes me wish that there was just a bit more of them.
I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've got enough time for about one more. Do we want to talk about Watcher or do we want to talk about Piggy?
I would like to hear your opinions on both, so I'll let you decide.
Terry, what do you want to talk about?
I don't really have a whole lot to say about Piggy.
Okay.
Watcher it is.
Watcher it is. Okay, so this is another exciting one. I love also the fact that we're talking about primarily female directed films. I think only Emily the Criminal is male directed. So Sundance did a really good job of shining a spotlight on female directed and particularly genre films. So, okay, Watcher. This is written and directed by Chloe Okuno, and I think both of you are familiar with her VHS 1994 segment. I am not. I've not seen that. So I went into this having no idea what I was getting into. And this feels like one of those gorgeous 1970s throwback of an American woman goes to a exotic foreign location, can't speak the language, gets herself into trouble, and bad stuff happens. So Jessica, what did you think of Watcher?
This was, as a woman, it was a frustrating watch at times, not because of anything the movie did wrong, but because of how accurately it portrays men who poo-poo women who have a gut feeling about somebody or something doesn't feel right, and they're usually correct about that. I'm not saying that that's correct in the movie or not. I'm not spoiling anything, but just how dismissive everyone is and how condescending everyone is to this woman who feels unsafe. I thought, they did a great job. And obviously, is it Micah Monroe? It was nice to see her again, because she's a lot of genre roles. But it was a frustrating and tense watch because I've been there. And I love, as you say, having so many female filmmakers telling these female stories. They really get it, and I think that really came across, that sense of being so isolated. Even if you're not in a foreign country where you don't speak the language, that's how it feels, being surrounded by perhaps men who don't get what you're going through. You're not speaking the same language. You are isolated. You are alone. So I thought that was a really smart way to convey that.
I liked how the movie did that too, by the way. Sorry to interject.
No, go ahead.
But the way that it does not use subtitles at all. And so it really forces you to view the situation from Micah's perspective, Micah's character's perspective. And I love that, because I was getting so frustrated in the opening scene when she's in a taxi with her husband, and her husband's conversing in Romanian with the driver, and she's like, I have no idea what is happening. And that is a thing I think that continues. So yes, I'm glad you brought up that sort of like the language barrier aspect.
Yeah, I really appreciated that, because I've lived in a foreign country, but I was lucky enough that it was a predominantly English speaking country. But even semantic language differences can kind of throw you off and make you feel like an outsider. So this feels like almost a triple dip, right? Like, she's a woman in a foreign country that seems like a lot of her interactions are with men who either don't believe her or treat her not well, like they sexualize her. And then there's the language barrier that prevents her from understanding what people are doing. And then there's also this disinterest in the people in Bucharest of actually communicating with her. Like, she has a bunch of dinner parties with her husband, so she's moved there for work with her husband, and the husband doesn't make an effort to include her in the conversations. So they'll speak English briefly, but then they'll switch to Romanian, and they know she doesn't understand, or that she has a slighter grasp of it. And those scenes are so effective for putting us on Julia's side, the Micah Monroe character. And then I guess the other piece that I would highlight as a real strength of the film is the voyeurism aspect. So they move into this gorgeous apartment that has almost floor to ceiling windows. So they're very exposed. And there's a shot early on. So they arrive in Bucharest. They immediately kind of like fall into bed because it's kind of like, I don't know about you too, but it's like when you go on vacation and you get a hotel room and you're like, let's have sex because it's a fun thing to do. So they begin having sex, and Okuno just pulls the camera out further and further. It reminded me of that gorgeous shot from Candyman. So I was already like, yes, I'm on my, this is my shit. This is my jam. But I love that that's also our entryway to the voyeurism aspect, because we get a lot of surveillance cameras, we get a lot of like looking at windows, we get a lot of long shots of her sort of being isolated or potentially being seen. And I mean, I love an erotic thriller and I love a kind of like 70s throwback, so a lot of the visual aesthetic in this film was really working for me.
Yeah, same. I'm glad you brought up the dinner scene too, because one of the lines that like really struck with me is she's at the dinner table. Her husband and her husband's work friend and her husband's work friend's wife are all communicating in Romanian. She's like, "Do I need to leave so the grown-ups can talk?" Like that line is just like that. Just really like cuts to the problem, because they see her as they're treating her like a kid. They're treating her like her thoughts do not matter in this grown-up situation, this grown-up dialogue. And then they also use the language barrier to keep away key points about like this killer in order to protect her. And so I do think that this movie has some really great scenes in it, like that one. I love the way it looks. I love the film. You both have said 70s throwback. Yes, this movie feels like it could have belonged in a sort of more classical Polanski era, or like, you know, it brings in a little bit of it has some Italian horror vibes to it in terms of the cinematography and the staging of it. It does really well with the voyeuristic aspect of it. I was glad you brought up the Candyman, because I was like, Candyman shot. Like it's always going to be a Candyman shot for me now, and it does it so well. I don't think the script. Okay, my problem with this movie is again the script, because I do think that this movie is like a mix of Rear Window. You have Rear Window vibes. You also have a Stranger in a Strange Land story tropes, and then you also have the Gaslit Women, which has become a subgenre at this point. I think, particularly in the last like 5 or 6 years. But the problem is that I think it hits all of those plot points to a T, to the fact that like 20 minutes into the movie, I was like, okay, this is how the movie is going to play out. We introduce the one sole female character that is talking to her and, you know, is able to communicate with her in English. Okay, well, something's going to happen with that person. Like all of these things that are they're setting it up. It was, it kind of took out the edge for me, because I knew from the very moment that she's introduced and they set up these different tropes that the movie was going to go along the set line. And unfortunately for me, it felt very kind of cookie cutter in terms of the story progression. So for me, that was the biggest issue I had with this. I think Okuno is a much better director and a much better capturing like the feel of a movie than maybe a screenwriter in this particular situation. I know she had a co-screenwriter, Zach Ford. So I don't know how much, you know, either of them contributed to the script, but the script for me was the weakest part. But I loved, again, the performances. I thought Micah was great. I thought Bern Gorman, who plays this man across the street that's maybe watching her, maybe not, maybe she's watching him and he's uncomfortable. Like I love that. And you've seen him in so many different things, from The Dark Knight Rises and Pacific Rim Uprising, and Pacific Rim to that degree. I remember him particularly from Crimson Peak, and also he was in what was it? It was Torchwood, the Doctor Who spinoff.
Right. Yes. Okay.
That's where I remember him. Like whenever I see him, I'm like, oh, Torchwood. But I thought the acting was great. I thought that it created a very great mood and a very interesting tone. Some of those story beats, I was like, okay, are we going to do something a little different? And for me, it didn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the performance of the watcher, you know, the man across the street, because I did like that they kind of inverted it and at a certain point throughout the movie, you realize that Julia is the Watcher for the most part, but by necessity, because she has to be on guard
Yeah.
at all times. And
Mhm.
I like that they kind of played with that with the
Yeah.
title. And I am with you there. Pretty early on, I was like, okay, here's what the plot is mapped out in my mind, and I was just waiting for the payoff.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm not going to say the line because I feel like it's too spoilery, but there was one particular line that her neighbor says that was like, ding, hang a lampshade on that.
Yeah.
And I really liked the way it was written, but at the same time, how it works in the narrative was perhaps too on the nose. So I'm with you, Terry, on just those story beats and how it played out. But I did like the way that it played with that voyeurism and paranoia, because like we've talked about,
Mm,
I'm a sucker for a 70s throwback, and
mhm,
that's cinematography, that
mm.
opening shot I love.
It's
So
so lush.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, this film is a mood, which I know is like a bit cliche to say, but it just, I really, I was enthralled with the way that it looked and the kind of like exotic foreign locale kind of feel to it. Like it felt like a trip to Europe, but in a threatening way. It had those throwback appeals. So I was like, oh, we're doing a kind of classical revamp with Micah Monroe, who also is stunning. Like she's
Mhm.
fantastic in this movie. It's really
Yeah.
her movie. She's in almost every shot, I think.
Mhm.
Um, I'm with you that I wish that the film had been a little bit more audacious with its narrative, because I do think just the fact we all know exactly where it's going to go and then it goes exactly there, it just feels a little disappointing. And then part of me was like, okay, but if you remove that, so much of the rest of the film is working. And again, no spoilers, but I do think that even though we know where the end is going, when we get the payoff was actually pretty freaking good. Like I
Yeah.
really enjoyed the ending and how it kind of went for it.
Hmm. I
Yeah, and there's a
agree on that.
couple. Me too. There's a couple really gasp-inducing scenes, particularly towards the end, that
Mhm.
really worked for me. Even when there was a lot of like, well, this is a Chekhov situation. Like, there's a lot of these types of things that are set up again that I'm like, okay, well, like
Mhm.
you know where things are gonna turn out. But I love the way that Chloe stages a tension scene. Like there's a moment early on where she goes to the movie theater alone and she's
I
watching a
love the movie
movie,
theater scene.
and someone sits right behind her, and the way it's framed, he almost like becomes her shadow. Like he just sort of evaporates into the background, and she gets so creeped out she leaves, and then all of a sudden the man is in the grocery store behind her, but
Mhm.
like lounging on the corner, like he's either not being able to decide what he wants to buy, or he's just waiting for her to move on so he can continue to follow her. And the way I love a good grocery store scene where
Mhm.
you have like two ends of the aisle and one person's on one end and the other person's on the other. It again, it feels almost kind of like a trope, but it's shot so well that I was like, ooh, this is really giving me that kind of tension. Where is he going to pop up? Because he's going to
Yeah.
pop up somewhere.
Mhm.
And I just, yeah, so I think that those moments of it just are so good. And it's funny to me, Joe, that you mentioned that we'd both seen VHS 94, because this feels so completely different from her
Okay.
segment in that. Like this is two opposite ends of filmmaking here, that it just that one I'm now wondering is like a footnote in her career, in terms of I wonder which one she's more interested in, because she didn't
Okay.
have any like real story control over that one, because I think it
Mhm.
was set before she came into direct, whereas this one is more of you
It's more
know
personal, right?
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm curious if this is going to be more of the direction we'll see from her. Although I honestly think she had the best segment of VHS 94. So I would love to see her kind of be a little bit more playful in that regard. But this was a huge leap in terms of like cohesive, uh, definitely personal storytelling, I would say.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've run a little bit longer than I anticipated, and I don't want to keep the two of you, but I guess any sort of final wrap ups, like if you could recommend one of the films that we discussed today for people to keep an eye out on, what would you pick?
I would personally pick Master because the style and the horror elements worked for me the best. Um, I would recommend all of them for different reasons, but to me, Master is the standout of the ones that we've discussed.
Okay. Terry?
Okay. I think for me, the one that we discussed that I would probably recommend is honestly, as much as I had issues with it, I think Speak No Evil, just because I think it will be easily available for most of your listeners, Joe. And I
Right.
think that it's doing some interesting things. It probably isn't. I mean, we kind of all talked about some of the issues with it, but I think in terms of what the audience is going to probably go into and actually probably enjoy the most, I think probably Speak No Evil.
Interesting. Okay. Um, I'm actually going to say Watcher is the one that I think people are going to dig. I think if you can get away from like go in knowing that your expectations are probably going to be fulfilled narratively, it's just a really great, solid, well-crafted, well-acted film. But yeah, I agree with you, Jessica, that I think all of these films are absolutely worth checking out. And there were a bunch of other ones that we didn't all collectively see that I think we would probably recommend. It felt like a really strong slate of genre films and other films as well. Like I saw a bunch of non-genre films that really blew me away this year. So it was nice because I think there were a couple gems from the 2021 festival, but this year felt like a much stronger crop of films.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a lot of really good films at Sundance 2022 that I think are going to really wow people when they come out. And there's a lot of really big purchases that I think are going to do some really good things for genre fans and some non-genre fans, because there was a couple of really good non-genre related stuff that I saw too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, so if folks want to find you, Jessica, how would they get in touch?
I'm on Twitter at We Who Walk Here. I am on Twitter way too much, so you can come say hi to me or check out my writing and everything else at We Who Walk Here.
Yeah, and not to diminish your writing, but also I want to give a shout out to your cosplay because it's one of the things that I enjoy seeing the most when I log onto Twitter.
Thank you so much.
Me too. You just nail it. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Terry, what about you?
You can find me at Gaily Dreadful on Twitter and to a lesser degree Instagram.
Yeah, don't go looking for Terry on Instagram. He's almost never there.
What do I do here?
Pictures? What? Look, we can't all be great cosplayers. This is what we're saying. Some of us only have pictures of books and movies. All right. Well, that'll do it for another Horror Queers hangout. Thank you both so much for chatting with me and taking some time out of your weekend. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Always.
Talk to you two later.